And in today's episode, I am so excited because I am inviting a guest from my home country, India, and I'm just really excited about it. So Anne will be talking to us about her experience from turning from a doctor to a writer, and we'll be touching on subjects like self-criticism and storytelling and what she sees as the role of storytelling in people's lives. Welcome to Women in Action, the podcast for therapists and coaches who are making a difference in people's lives. I'm your host, Beverly Jessup, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on this journey of inspiration, growth, and achievement. Each week, we bring you conversations with remarkable women who have defied the odds, shattered glass ceilings, and achieved success in the field of therapy and coaching. We explore their personal stories, the challenges they've overcome, and the strategies they've employed to thrive in their professions. From building thriving online practices to overcoming mindset challenges, we provide insights and practical strategies to help you excel in your therapy or coaching career. Through candid conversations and expert insights, we dive into topics such as leadership, self-care, client rapport, and personal development. Our goal is to create a supportive community where therapists and coaches can connect, learn from each other, and be inspired to make a positive impact in the lives of their clients. We believe that every therapist and coach has the power to create transformative change and shape their clients' destinies. So whether you're tuning in during your commute or taking a break between sessions, get ready to be inspired, motivated, and empowered. Women in Action is here to ignite your passion, elevate your mindset, and equip you with the tools you need to make a difference in the lives of those you serve. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of personal and professional growth. Let's dive into today's episode, and together, let's unleash the power of women in action. Good morning, Anne. It's morning in the UK. Whereabouts are you from, and what time is it there?
So I'm in Bhopal in India. It's right in the center of the country, and it's 12:30 p.m. where I am.
Okay, it's lovely to meet a fellow Indian, and I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about your journey. So tell us about yourself and your journey from changing from being a doctor to becoming a writer. It's a fascinating story.
Sure. So I'm Ann HariKeerthan. I was born in South India and I grew up in South India. And I think from the time I was 6 years old, I really wanted to be a writer. I just found that writing was a fantastic way for me to express my thoughts. And when I wrote, I felt so much like myself. But in India, parents often, ask their children to do medicine or engineering or something of that sort. Art isn't as secure in most families' eyes. And, circumstances in my house as well as in my community dictated that I join medicine. Now, this was a difficult decision because I was very afraid of blood. I'm a highly sensitive person and an empath, and at the sight of blood, I kind of cringe. If someone is crying, I cry. So my entire time in medicine was quite emotionally draining. And the interesting thing is that the moment I joined medicine, it felt like I had sort of just said to myself, you don't deserve to write. So I stopped writing altogether. I was in the field for about 8 years. I studied for 5 years and then worked for 3 years. And the entire time, I wrote just a few tiny bits of work. I think during the last year of work as a doctor, I asked myself, is this really the field that I want to be in, because I could see that I was changing as a person. I could see that I was becoming a little bit tougher. I was becoming a little more abrasive in the way that I spoke to people. And there were a lot of coping strategies that I had developed around just my fear of blood and being around people in pain. And I didn't like that. I didn't like how I had to tell myself that the person that I'm treating is not a person, to sort of, dehumanize in order to help them. So at one point, I made a very conscious decision to leave medicine, or at least practicing medicine, and to become a full time writer. Now, obviously, leaving medicine meant that I was disappointing a lot of people. So it was a very difficult time for me. In the beginning, I didn't have a lot of support as a writer. And do remember that I had not written anything in 8 years. So I felt like I was completely new to this field. And it was quite a challenging time for me because I didn't know who to approach for help. But the beautiful thing is that around this time, I just noticed that God was bringing so many amazing people into my life, including a bunch of published writers who wanted to help me. So it's under their mentorship and guidance that I have become the writer that I am today. So since that time, and I quit medicine 5 years back, since that time, I've been published in a few magazines. I've been published in Highly Sensitive Refuge, Our Daily Bread, in the New England Journal of Medicine. And my book has a book deal and it's soon going to come out. That's
Wow.
about me.
Oh, wow. That's so exciting. When's what's your book about?
So my book is about hurt and healing. I'm talking about how we all suffer, and I also talk about the healing journey of how we kind of go through certain phases of healing, but how there are similarities between all of our journeys, and at the same time, there's a lot of distinctiveness because each of us heals our own way.
Wow. Right. So that is emotional healing rather than physical, you'd say, or
I
what?
would say that it leans more towards emotional, spiritual, and social healing, but it does also talk a little bit about physical healing. I draw a lot from my time during medicine, so it does talk about the body quite
Wow. Well, that's a really interesting story. I think I'm going to have to get that book.
a lot.
So the book is called, just remind us again for the listeners and watchers today. What's your book?
So the book is not published yet. It has a book deal. It's currently in the process of being edited. The tentative title is Bearing Our Burdens.
Wow. Okay. Well, we'll have to be looking out for that. So in your experience, why do you think that stories have had such a strong impact on people?
I think that stories are very impactful for a few reasons. The first one being that stories are engaging. So I'm just reminded of times when, I've sat in church and I've listened to the pastor give a sermon, and I would just be nodding off until he says, once upon a time. Just those words would just bring me back, and I would listen to the story. So I wouldn't know what he's talking about. But when he's mentioning a story and narrating it, it just captures my attention. And I think this is true of everyone, whether it's children in a classroom or whether it's a person listening to a philosophical discussion. It does not matter what it is, what the topic is. When someone tells a story, people pay attention.
Yeah,
That's the first thing.
we share that Christian faith, and Jesus had tons of people who'd come and listen to his stories and his parables. And I just from your perspective, what do you think? Why did Jesus do that? Why did you think he told stories rather than just, telling them what to
Yeah.
do?
I think that stories also do a couple of other things, which might be part of the reason why Jesus used a lot of them. One is that stories are also easy to understand. And a lot of the stories that Jesus chose to speak about were stories of things that were happening in their day-to-day life. So things that people would have been familiar with, like farming or sheep or so on and so forth. So they're all things that people know. In that way, Jesus was able to take some really complicated ideas and present it in a way that people could understand. So
Yeah.
that's definitely one of the reasons I would say.
I think I was thinking about like the story of the prodigal son, and something
Yeah,
that, I mean, I've got three boys. So and when you think about people who have fallen away from the faith and gone and done their own thing, um and particularly if there are your own sons, it evokes emotions inside you, thinking, I don't want that to happen to my sons.
yeah.
How does the father feel? How does the oldest brother feel? And, and how did the prodigal son feel? And all the experience that he went through, it evokes those really strong feelings, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's definitely true. And I think that the most impactful stories tap into the emotion. They write, or at least they write in such a way that people can understand or appreciate what the emotions could have been. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that Jesus did that too.
Before we continue with the episode, I'd like to take a moment to share some valuable tools that have helped me grow my business and streamline my operations. If you're curious about the tools I personally use and recommend, then I'm excited to unveil my tool secrets to you. Head over to mavenbusinesshaven.com/tools, where you'll find a curated selection of resources that can enhance your business endeavors. One tool that I absolutely adore is Easy Peasy Funnels, an all-in-one marketing solution that simplifies your workflow. With Easy Peasy Funnels, you can effortlessly create stunning blogs, websites, funnels, invoices, calendar links, emails, courses, and much more. Imagine having the power to streamline your marketing efforts and manage multiple aspects of your business from one central platform. Easy Peasy Funnels empowers you to do just that, allowing you to focus on what truly matters, serving your clients and making a meaningful impact. So don't miss out on this incredible tool and its extensive features. Visit mavenbusinesshaven.com/tools to access Easy Peasy Funnels and explore other fantastic resources that can elevate your business to new heights. Now let's return to our inspiring conversation and continue on the path of growth and success. Remember, it's through embracing the right tools that we can unlock our full potential. Yeah. So, like many writers sort of experience sort of self-doubt or self-criticism, because when I write things, I think, oh, that's not good enough. Now I can just say, oh, that's not good enough, or ChatGPT write it better for me. But how have you managed to overcome these challenges in your writing journey?
Okay. So I studied creative writing for a couple of years. And one of the first things that our teachers taught us was that there were two paths to our brain. There's the creative side of us, and then there's the critical side of us. Now, we actually need both to be a writer. The creative side of us helps us to imagine, come up with stories, come up with things to write. And then the critical part of us is the editor. Now, the only thing is that we don't allow the critical side of us to work while the creative side of us is working. So, what they taught us to do is to give ourselves permission to say to our critical brain, I'll come back to you in a bit. I need your expertise, but not right now. Right now, I'm just going to write. So once we've kind of detached that part and said, yes, I will look at it with critical eyes later, it allows us to write as freely as possible. So the rule when we're writing is that the first draft, we're not allowed to censor. we just write whatever comes to us. And then as we're editing it, we allow ourselves to just look at, things that we can change. And we never say to ourselves, this is rubbish or this is bad. We always ask ourselves, how can I make it better? So I would say that those are the two biggest techniques. One is to separate the critical side of us from the period when we're writing. And the second is when we're editing, rather than say this is not good, we ask, how can we make this better?
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's a really good way of looking at it. But I imagine that you did suffer from self-criticism in your own writing. So tell us a story about how you tackled it.
Okay, so I think that I wrote a lot when I was younger. And so I had quite a lot of poems. I had I had written a book when I was a child. And after I quit medicine again, I began to write a lot. But I was very afraid of looking at what I had written because I thought if I look at it, I would know that I'm a bad writer. So I would just stop myself from reading what I had written. Now, if I'm not reading what I've written, there's no way for me to edit it, and there's no way for me to send it out. So I would just sit on it. I would have a lot of material, which is completely unseen, completely unread, just there, And I think that the biggest lesson for me was to sort of just allow myself that space. So I would tell myself, yes, you have grown. And it's possible that the way that you will write today is quite different from the way that you have written in the past. But that's okay, because if you have grown, that means there was a point at which you weren't as good as you are today. So all you have to do is read what you've written, and then you can tweak it to make it as good as it can possibly be for other people to see. And the interesting thing is that when I did this and I looked at my work, I found that actually my work was already quite good. So I think it's just that, it's just allowing ourselves that space, thinking it's okay if we make mistakes. We can tweak it.
That's right. And I mean, I like to say to myself, well, it's not a mistake, it's a learning opportunity.
Yeah.
But
So true.
you've written for Our Daily Bread and Highly Sensitive Refuge.
Yeah.
Maybe some people might not know the latter, actually. I know Daily Bread from my Christian side, but could you just tell us how you got involved with them and how you use your storytelling to kind of connect with those readers if they're different audiences?
Yeah. So they are for different audiences. Our Daily Bread is a Christian devotional, and it usually has something for every day. So there's a little bit of a portion from the Bible that we have to read. And then there's a key verse. And then following that, there's the author's takeaway. So that takeaway, the aim is to help the reader to just begin to think a little bit more about the scripture. So I got in touch with Our Daily Bread through one of the churches that I was part of, I think 4 years back. And again, very interesting because I heard about them. I sent in a few samples of my writing. Then I didn't hear back from them for over a year. I think a year later, they said, we're still looking for writers. Would you still be interested in writing for us? So I said, sure. And they had a few trainings teaching us about their style. And then following that, they asked us to write. So last year, I had written 4 articles for Our Daily Bread. And this year, I have written 10. So that will come out next year, 2024.
Amazing. So can you give us an example of a story that you wrote that kind of resonated with that particular audience?
Okay, sure. So I was really thinking about, suffering and what it might be like for God. And you know how sometimes when we are in pain, we think God is very far away from us. So from that point of view, I was just thinking about a story that I could tell. And with this particular one, I decided not to narrate a personal story, but something a little bit more like a parable, if you will. I spoke about how I collect coffee mugs. And there's this one particular coffee mug that the moment I pour a drink in it, so if I pour coffee into it, it makes this kind of gurgling sound. And because it makes that gurgling sound, I really like it. It's like it's singing to me or saying something to me. So whenever I can, I use that mug. So I'm closest to that mug. And then later on, I Googled it and I found that mugs make this sort of gurgling noise when there's a crack in it. And that just got me thinking. It's the broken mug that sings.
Yeah.
So that's what I've written about how
Oh,
God is
that's a
closer
really
to
lovely
us.
story. That's a lovely
Yeah.
story. And that makes me think about my retreat that I'm doing in November. I'm actually doing an online retreat as well as an in-person retreat. And the title or the activities involved is about brokenness. And it's an art journaling retreat. And one of the activities is to draw a self-portrait, or to trace one if you don't feel you can draw one, and to think about the brokenness in your heart. Think about in your life and things like the challenges that you've suffered, and write them down just in a single word. And I've recently suffered from quite a lot. So a lot of things have happened to other people very close to me in my life. And, things around depression, dementia, heart disease, whatever, those sort of like have happened to other people who are very close. And it's stirred up emotions in me. So I was thinking, well, I could write all those things down on the back of this, or everyone could write their challenges down on the back of their portrait. And on the other side of it, so half of it is all the challenges, and the other half would be, well, what did I learn from those things, from those experiences, when someone close to me attempted suicide and I had to support that person, what did I learn from it? And or my parents in hospital and suffering from dementia, what have I learned from it? And put all those sort of feelings and thoughts on that side, and then tearing them all up, tearing that picture that you think is, I've done quite a good job here as a self-portrait, but tearing them up into bits and then putting it back all together, but gluing it down on a beautiful piece of paper and putting gold in the cracks. And it made me think of that kintsugi pottery, how you put the pieces together and it becomes something more precious than what you had before. So I like that story of like the brokenness, really, and how God can use that, turn our weaknesses into his opportunities. So Anne, I was curious about the Highly Sensitive Refuge. It's not a publication I know. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So Highly Sensitive Refuge is a magazine which is intended to help people who identify as highly sensitive. Now, highly sensitive is a fairly new term, which was coined by a person named Aaron Elaine, I think. Elaine Aaron. Sorry, I've mixed up her surname and first name. So it's Elaine Aaron. And she basically uses this particular word, this phrase, to describe people whose nervous systems are a little on the sensitive side. So, for instance, people who are highly sensitive would be able to pick up sounds, light, and just things like, environmental cues really quickly. And they also tend to be very intuitive to other people's body language and emotions. So a lot of them are very empathetic, and just like me, they cry when they see another person cry. So emotions are almost transferred, like a infection, if you will, to the
Yeah.
other person. So this is the audience that Highly Sensitive Refuge aims to speak to. And the magazine tries to help highly sensitive people find a way to live in a very noisy and overstimulating world. So
Okay.
I've written, I think, about 8 articles for them so far, and all of them have spoken about things like suffering, guilt, forgiveness, and yeah, a lot of other topics.
Okay, that's really interesting because when I did my first Christian art journaling retreat, the women who came to that, they told stories of suffering and how God had brought them through them, but they were just horrific. Some of the stories was just horrific in terms of marriage breakdowns, abusive relationships, running away, and caring for a disabled loved one until they died. There was stories of suicide, divorce, and when I heard all these stories, I just wanted to cry, just thinking, how did these women how can they even tell this story alone still be standing, because they are really, it's really hard to see people go through that, but it's amazing on the other side to see how God has brought them through that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really liked what you said earlier about how when we go through something difficult, we can look at what we have learned through it.
Mm.
And one of the articles that I wrote for Highly Sensitive Refuge is about finding meaning in suffering. And it's based on the work of a person named Viktor Frankl. He was a psychiatrist who lived through the Holocaust. And he says that there's not one meaning to our suffering. Each of us has to sort of try to figure out what the specific purpose or point of our suffering is. And
Yeah.
again, it's not like there's one. So we can give meaning to our experience. It could
Yeah.
be that our suffering helps us to see strengths that already exist. It might be that our suffering makes us a little bit more empathetic and helps us understand other people.
Mm.
Maybe through our suffering, we're now in a place where we can teach other people.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's interesting you say that, because when that first art retreat happened last November and people were telling me all these different stories, I was thinking, but I've not suffered from divorce or marital breakdown or having to run away from my husband or abuse or anything like that. I've not suffered any of those things, and you think, oh, how do I relate to these women? And then over a series of weeks, and I mean weeks, and very recent weeks actually, I feel God has brought me through a succession of grief. And you kind of think, why have you done it in such a short space of time? From my father being taken into hospital with pneumonia, now he's actually got COVID, he's got dementia, he's like, and then another close member of the family attempting suicide, having an induced coma, and me having to support that person. And then my husband collapsing at work, which we thought was a heart attack. It turned out not to be, but it looked as if it was. And then finally my cat dying. I'm thinking, in a space of like 6 to 8 weeks, all this happened. I don't know how I'm still standing. By the grace of God, that I and the art journaling has the prayer and the art journaling all sort of rolled into one, has played a really important part in keeping me sane and helping me go through this, because I felt God saying, as I drew this picture of the heart, and the heart was like not a normal shape of a heart, it was a bit elongated heart, and then it was bruised inside. And I just felt God saying, your pain is going to stretch out to other people, and I'm gonna use your pain to help others. So that's why it's wide, the heart being wide. And it's not just constricted to your pain. You're gonna be able to invite other people in, and help them through the art and the journaling and the time of worship with God. So that's interesting that you should say that, really, about suffering and how it impacts your life. Yeah. So what advice do you feel that you could give to sort of aspiring writers about crafting stories and captivating their readers?
So there are a few things that I've learned, which particularly help. What I've understood is that it helps to always have only one point that we want to make. So if we can get clear about what it is that we want to say and make sure that that's just one point, that would be perfect as a starting point. And then once we know exactly what we want to say, we sort of dig into our lives to find a story that illustrates that point. And maybe it's a personal story, maybe it's an analogy, or maybe it's a collective experience. Any of this should work. So if we choose a story which illustrates the point, we can use that to sort of drive home the point that we want to make. Once we have found the story, we sort of tell ourselves, okay, I'm safe now, I'm in a safe place, but I want to know what emotions I felt when I experienced that, or when I think of that particular analogy. We tap into those emotions and we write from that space where we feel those emotions. The reason we do this is because even if the circumstances are different, even if the story is different, the emotion is universal. So our reader, even if they're not able to completely understand what it is that we're saying, they will be able to understand the emotion that we're feeling as we go through that particular event. And that's what resonates with them. So that's what I've learned. We tap into that emotion, we sit in that emotion, and then from that space, we write the story, and then finally make the point.
So you'd say that is the most sort of specific technique or element that you need to incorporate into your stories to make it impactful. Are there any other elements? I mean, the emotion is obviously, as you say, universal, but are there any other techniques to kind of structure that story that makes it even more impactful?
Yeah, so with stories, and this might not apply to all stories, but it applies to, I would say, maybe 80% of stories. There's always a point of transformation. There's always a point at which something changes. And that change may be thought, or the change might be behavior. But there's something that shifts. So if we're able to figure out what the transformation is, then we can ensure that the story that we write is quite powerful. So we find the transformation, and then we ask ourselves, what were things like before? What were things like after? And then we write the things that the way that it felt before as the beginning part of the story, the transformation as the middle part of the story, and what happened after, the result as the end of the story. And that forms a very beautiful narrative arc, which tends to be the hero's journey as well. But this usually tends to work.
That's really, really interesting. So, I mean, coming from an Indian background, and you also from an Indian background, how do you kind of, sort of respect and resonate with people from various cultural backgrounds without offending anyone? How do you do that?
So I tried to sort of tap into what is universal. So one of the things that I learned is that there are a lot of things that, for instance, Jesus taught, which was also taught by other people. For instance, the Buddha taught some of these things. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna taught some of these things. So what I try to do when I'm writing for people, and this is what I do when I write for highly sensitive refuge, is to sort of look at what pervades or sort of transcends religious boundaries and resonates with all people. So I take things which are part of my Christian faith, but then I present it in a way that is not about the religion, but more about us as people who are all trying to find our way back to God, if that makes sense. So generally, people don't realize that it's coming from a Christian background, but I think that because it's things that we're naturally inclined for, they resonate with it.
Okay, so can you give it sort of like an example of a story where that cultural sensitivity played a crucial role in its effectiveness? Because I'm thinking of, I read a story in The Guardian yesterday about a couple who in the 1970s, she's from a Hindu background, he was English, and they met in Leicester. And, her parents were really against that union, and they were still at university. And then they got married very quickly. And the story was about how he saw her in a busy pub and she wasn't actually supposed to be there, not that she was drinking alcohol or anything, but it wasn't the kind of cultural dumb thing for her. But anyway, that's where they met, and they fell in love, and they'd been married now for 50 years. But in those days, in 1970s, it wouldn't be an acceptable thing, there was a lot of racism around in the UK in the 1970s. And then obviously there's the cultural differences as well. And having, I've been married to my university sweetheart for 31 years now, and he's English, and there was that cultural differences to navigate as well. So have you got a story like that of cultural diversity, sensitivity that you can tell?
I think this is very interesting. So what I found was that when I went to study creative writing, and I studied creative writing in the UK, so I was there for a year. When I was there, one of the things that our teachers told us is to write what we know. And what I know is what is Indian, because I grew up in India and I'd lived most of my life in India. So they encouraged me to write that. And what's beautiful is that at this particular time in history, people are actually open to hearing about different cultures, and that diversity is appreciated. So I wrote stories based on what I know from India, and most of my characters were set in India. And actually, it was received really well. So even though the people who were my classmates, the people who were giving me feedback were not Indian, they understood what I was talking about because, again, the emotions that I conveyed were all universal.
Yeah. No, that's really, really interesting. So I was just thinking about the selling of products and ideas though, and sometimes, when we're trying to sell things, on a website or in a sort of ebook or something like that, it sometimes feels like, oh, I don't really want to sell. I don't want to sound like a secondhand car dealer, so what do you think what do you think is the role between storytelling and selling your products or your ideas?
Yeah. So I think that what I've recognized really helps is the personal story. So if we talk about whatever it is that we're trying to sell, but we talk about how it has impacted our life. So for instance, if it's something that we created, we talk about how we came up with it. We talk about why it's important to us. And then from that space, talk about how it's important to us and therefore we're offering it now to the world.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel as icky, and it feels like, this is an expansion. It's a gift that we're giving to other people because we have learned something. And yes, this is not the kind of thing which we give for free, but that's only because people understand and appreciate the value of what we want to offer them. And I think that if we build our sales pages using our personal story as the base, it won't feel as icky. It won't feel as difficult. It'll feel a little bit more natural because we're authentically telling people what has happened in our life and why we came up with what we came up with.
Yeah, that's very true. So it's been really lovely talking to you. I've got some quick fire questions I usually end the podcast with. Are you happy for me to do that?
Yeah.
Okay, tell us what your favorite food is.
Biryani.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, I love that too. And your favorite book?
It's a book called Disappointment with God by Philip Yancey. I read it when I was 13 and it completely changed my life.
Disappointment with God. I'm going to have to look that up. And your favorite color?
Blue.
Okay. And what about your favorite Bible verse or something that you've been reading that's Bible related?
Yeah, so there are, I think, too many verses that I like, but I can mention the one that's really standing out to me this particular year, and that is Micah 6:8. I'll just read it out. So it says, He has told you, O man, what is good and what the Lord requires of you. Do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God.
Wow. Oh, I like that. Okay, so it's been wonderful talking to you, Anne. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Women in Action. Tell us where people can find out more about you and contact you.
So the easiest would probably be to find me on social media. I am on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. But you can also check out my website, which is annharikeerthan.com. And
do you want to spell that out for us? Sorry.
Sure. It's Ann, A-N-N, HariKeerthan, HariKeerthan.com. And my email is annharikeerthan@gmail.com.
Oh, it's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much, Anne, for coming on this episode. And I look forward to speaking to you soon because you're going to do a little bit of a masterclass inside our membership on how to get published. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, so that'd be great. All right. Thank you so much. And I will speak to you soon. Take care. God bless.
Bye. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure being here.
Wow, as we wrap up another empowering episode of Women in Action podcast, I can't help but to do a virtual happy dance in celebration of your dedication to personal and professional growth. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. Your support means the world to us. If you found value in today's episode, we would be truly grateful if you take a moment to leave a review. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners like yourself and spread the message of empowerment far and wide. To access all the show notes and explore a treasure trove of free resources, head over to mavenbusinesshaven.com/podcast. There you'll find a wealth of additional content that complements the episodes, empowering you to take inspired action and continue your journey of growth. Remember, the Women in Action community is here to support you every step of the way. Together, we can create a ripple effect of positive change and inspire women around the world to embrace their full potential.